either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And today we are going back in time just a little bit.
Just a hair.
Yeah, because we've covered this is covering like kind of our Shark Week era that we would normally do.
Yeah, it's summer blockbuster. But this one's not a summer blockbuster.
Creature features now.
Exactly.
So we're moving fully on land. We're not doing Lake Placid sequels or any of those.
No, sorry.
Instead, we decided to do the movie with the very first ever special effects star, King Kong.
The king of all monsters.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's also kind of fitting to do it now, too, especially with how kind of popular the new King Kong series is getting.
Oh, definitely. And also because I think King Kong inspired just about every other creature feature to ever have existed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about all of the other ones, at least a lot of the big ones, that have either some ties directly to it, like in Godzilla, or just the idea of something larger than life being the scary epitome of all horror.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we hadn't talked about the one who came first.
Yeah. And I, honestly, for some reason, I don't attribute this movie to being a horror film. It's just...
Well, that's because you're not from 1930s.
Yeah, no, I completely get it that it's like horror for, like, old school.
It's horror. Yes, it is horror for the elderly, and even they might not find this spooky. But when it came out, you have to keep in mind when this came out, not just to, I think, understand or even appreciate this movie, but this is going to be one of those, back in those times were different movies.
Mm-hmm.
But normally when we say that, it is a weak sauce excuse to, like, have to look past something terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And while there is some stuff to look past that is terrible in Kong, for the most part, it's just because this was the first one to try a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And so for those unfamiliar with King Kong, it follows a film crew shooting a mysterious island that houses a mysterious beast.
Which is very interesting because that's essentially what the film was actually also doing.
Yeah, and I mean that's the time frame too. Is we're not that far out of the silent era.
No, we're really not.
Yeah, and then like narrative films are still trying to figure out what they're trying to do. We haven't really pushed sci-fi too far. Horror probably. I really haven't done surprisingly, I haven't done a dive into like super old school horror outside of George Méliès's first horror film.
Sure. I mean, well, partially because the genre didn't exist like we think of it.
Mm-hmm.
The first quote-unquote like horror movie was a short film showing a fake decapitation.
No, the first horror film was about a vampire.
Well, yes. But also, no, because it's one of those situations where are you drawing the line on what a horror film is? And this is back in the time where, like, this is like what the discussion that people had at the time was, because we now think of having certain aspects be part of a horror film, and that's why the vampire film is often labeled as the first horror film. It hits a lot of the big checkboxes.
Mm-hmm. Historians
will agree, like, yes, that one did all of the things, but much like what King Kong ended up doing, there wasn't ground rules for any of this yet. Like, George Méliès was still a relevant filmmaker at the time. Not alive, but in the way that, like, people would have still been actively familiar with his works, as opposed to, like, nowadays where it's more of a studied history piece.
George Méliès was still alive at this time.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, he was. He died in 1938, so.
Yeah, I mean, granted, he lived a very long time. But his works were still not just influential in, like, the sense of a director knowing who George Méliès was. Like, audiences would have been familiar with George Méliès.
Because he was the first special effects guy.
Yeah, and a lot of everything that everyone knew was based off of it. King Kong wasn't that far away from the beginning for a lot of special effects.
No, exactly. And we'll get into it, because this movie, I didn't realize how important it was in not just special effects, but it created a lot of the first 4 movies in general.
It sure did.
So, King Kong, the screenplay was by James Ashmore Clerman?
Mm-hmm.
Crowman?
Sure.
And Ruth Rose, based on the idea and story by Miriam C. Cooper and Edgar Wallace, and contributing writer Leon Gordon. It was directed by Miriam C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack. It stars Fay Ray as Ann Darrow, Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham, and Bruce Cabot as Jack Driscoll.
Yep. And honestly, nowadays, star-studded cast.
But at the time, I mean...
decently known for some, brand new for others. Our leading man would go on to be a heart-stopping cowboy and seen in many, many movies. But this was pretty early in his career, and you can tell he's a little stiff, especially compared to Faye.
Well, the whole movie's a bit stiff.
Well, yeah, the people who aren't made of clay and claymation are.
Yeah.
But especially compared to Faye, who was farther along in her acting career, she was a little bit better known. Robert and Bruce both were a bit younger and a bit newer to the scene, as far as, like... Newer
to the scene, considering it's only been around 10-15 years.
Yes, that's also true.
But our sources for today's episodes are RKO Productions 601, The Making of Kong, The Eighth Wonder of the World, which truly, if you want to know want a resource for the history and how to practical effects, that's the documentary you need to watch. It goes through Peter Jackson's kind of exploration of it and having to recreate some scenes because we don't have any of that information.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. As well as commentary by Ray Harryhausen, who was heavily inspired by this movie, and Ken Ralston with Fay Ray and Miriam C. Cooper as well. As well as a little bits from I'm Kong, The Exploits of Miriam C. Cooper.
Yep.
So the history of this movie is actually quite interesting. And
yes.
We're going to do an abridged version because there's a lot to Cooper and Schoedsack.
Oh, you could not have written this man more fancifully than his actual life was.
No, he sounds like Indiana Jones.
He sounds fake.
I know. Well,
they both do, honestly.
To give a little perspective, Cooper sounds even fake. Well, faker than what you could think, because originally he got shut down in like World War One.
Twice.
Thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
Because one of the times he got shot through the neck, survived.
Yeah.
Went and met Schoedsack, came back, started working in Hollywood, also had his own airplane company and commercial company, I think it was too. And then after Kong, when World War II broke out, he quit filmmaking, sold all his stock so that no one could call him a war profiteer, and went to fight in World War II, and then came back and started doing...
You missed a part. He was shot down in World War II as well, where he then was in a concentration camp for a while.
Yeah, and I think he was like an ace pilot too, so...
He was, and the first time he was shot down, he had to crash land with his knees because his arms had caught fire. What?
The dude is truly fascinating.
The man is insane.
If you get a chance, look him up. He's interesting.
And then when he came back from World War II, he thought to himself, I know what I should do. I should do docupics.
Well, that was after World War One, because that's what he was doing. So he and Schoedsack originally wanted to make movies about guerrillas following the docudramas that they made called Grass, A Nation's Battle for Life, and Chang, A Drama of the Wilderness.
Yes, they heavily focused on Thailand, and I think the Philippines was the other one.
Well, Grass, A Nation, Battle for Life was the U.S. crossing.
Yes.
Yeah. Because their whole thing was, one, they had a motto, keep it distant, difficult, and dangerous, and that's how they shot everything.
Yeah, they sure did.
As well, they were in the face of it all, too. Also, Ruth Rose was part of their group, too. But particularly for King Kong, they were inspired by Cooper's childhood when he was reading Equatorial Africa and some story about the hunt for the gorillas out there.
Yes.
But when Kong was being attempted to be made, before it was even King Kong.
Oh, yeah.
We were at the height of the Depression, and no one wanted to finance sending these guys to Africa.
You don't say.
It was only given to them to go ahead to make it because they said they could do it on the back lot of the studio. Which
is very impressive, especially considering the fact that from the moment Kong was, like, thought up, Cooper imagined him being absolutely gigantic. At no point in Cooper's mind was Kong ever going to be just, like, a little bit bigger, which honestly would have been much easier to film if they had done it Godzilla style, where they had a man in a suit. No. He wanted him to be like 40 feet tall out the gate.
Yes. And, I mean, we'll get into that a little bit later, but one thing that's important to know is that Kong is also an original story.
Yes.
There was no book that it was based off that a lot of movies or were based off books or plays back then.
Nope.
This was completely original, which is fascinating.
It's amazing.
But, I mean, it works so well because, like, we mentioned Ruth Rose a little bit as I haven't done a whole lot of diving into female writers. I just follow whoever I think's interesting.
Sure.
But she also fixed the script that Krellman did because he died before the movie could actually get fully written. And she wasn't a traditional writer. She was just one of the crew, or she was almost a third director for Krellman and Cooper, as well as a camera woman.
Honestly, everyone on this production seemed to just be a passion person, regardless of how much experience and or previous knowledge they seemed to have.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone worked on multiple things, not just in the sense of like, oh, we work on several different movies at once, but like half of this crew was also doing other amazing stuff at the same time as working on Kong.
Yeah. Yeah, what was it? I think Shotosak was shooting something else, and Fay Ray was in that too.
Yes,
so she had
and it came out like months apart.
Yeah.
What free time did they sleep with? No one knows.
No clue. But even with King Kong being an original story, I mean, there's been giant monsters in folklore and
definitely
short stories in general. I mean, the thing that sets King Kong apart, though, is that King Kong's a character and not just a creature.
Yes,
and I couldn't find anything. I don't think it's really based off any lore, because, I mean, we have lore of giant ape and hominids across the world. I mean, hell, existing since ancient times. I mean, the Yeti comes from pre-Buddhist folklore of the Himalayas.
Oh, sure. There's some speculation that a movie that came out a handful of years before Kong's, like, conception was a big inspiration. However, Cooper later on denies that heavily, especially considering how incredibly racist the other film is.
Oh, interesting.
It is really bad. Don't recommend looking into that one if you can avoid it at all.
I don't know its name, so
I don't really recommend anyone go look for it. So I'm gonna leave it out.
Okay.
It's really bad. But at the same time, I did look into it because there was a couple people online during my research that had mentioned that before, like, oh, there's another giant ape movie that came out in the same decade, essentially, or, you know, around, quote unquote, around the same time. I don't see the similarities at all. I see what Cooper's saying about, like, no, they just happened to have the same key buzzwords in them.
Oh.
Sort of situation. So,
okay.
I do think that this is, for once in Hollywood's history, a truly original idea. In the way that, like, he was inspired by gorillas.
Yeah. Well, not just that. So Cooper's original idea was to bring in real gorillas and komodos and do a docudrama.
You know?
Partly because he wanted to cover a topic, but also the reason they did docudramas, granted, were about 8 years or outside of Nanook of the North, which is considered the first documentary, even though it's like slightly, the narrative's not completely there.
Yeah, but documentary is a quote-unquote not a thing yet.
Yeah. But they wanted to do docudrama, but they wanted to cover a topic, but add a human element to it so that that you had something to connect to.
Sure. And also, you know, gorillas are, I mean, they were an interest at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on top of that, they had some Komodo dragons that they brought from their trips to the zoo. When they died, Rose said, killed by civilization. Yeah. An idea we heavily see in King Kong later on. We
sure do. Also, it should be noted that Cooper was also incredibly fascinated with Komodo dragons and also Kodak and Kodiak. He had a real thing for k noises in the wild. Well, something that he talked about briefly on why he named Kong Kong. He goes, I like k things.
You know?
Sure, why not?
Why not? But the big issue with King Kong was trying to get it visualized.
Oh, sure.
And Cooper struggled with it a little bit until he met the grandfather of special effects, Willis O'Brien, in 1931.
Honestly, the magic behind this.
And who at the time was a pioneer of stop-frame animation that came from the idea of bringing sculptures to life, which is really cool, too.
Oh, fantastic.
And also to give perspective how old this technique is, Thomas Edison bought O'Brien's first short, The Dinosaur and the Missing Link, A Prehistoric Tragedy, in 1915.
Yeah.
So that was
ancient.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a while.
Exactly. But it was also an opportunity for O'Brien because he was currently working on a film called Creation, but it was deemed too expensive to make. And so this helped get Cooper what he wanted because he already liked O'Brien's talents to begin with.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And also because of Creation, we see a lot of dinosaurs.
Yeah, and like Kong, things going into Kong and things also coming out of Kong. There was a lot of reusing of sets, of products, of placement of things.
Yeah.
To the point of like almost shot for shot, depending on where you're looking.
Yeah, the Great Wall of Kong is even used later on. I think they said it got burned down and gone with the wind.
Yeah, that feels right.
Yeah.
A lot of things caught fire back then, it seems.
Yeah. Before we dive into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
You have found an amazing beer with a lizard/dinosaur riding a skateboard with blonde hair because the main character is a blonde.
And
there are dinosaurs in this movie.
The brand is Fossil Cove.
It is. And honestly, this looks dope.
Cheers.
Cheers. And honestly, not that bad.
Also local, too.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So, King Kong.
Oh, king he sure is.
I don't know why, because we've covered so many not short films, but older movies.
Yeah.
Why I am always surprised that the title cards and opening credits are so goddamn long.
They're incredibly long.
This movie, so King Kong is about hour 40 minutes long.
Now. It is now an hour 40. We'll get to that.
There's almost 6 minutes of title cards and opening credits.
Yes, there is.
That
is a lot.
A big chunk of the film. And then
And
then on top of that, it's like the 10 Commandments, where it starts off with some proverb where it's like,
yes.
And lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing. And from that day, it was as one dead.
Which, I understand your confusion on the title card thing. However, I do like that it go ahead, like, this is an age in movies where hand-holding for the audience was still very much the norm.
Yes, that's why I always get confused, like, I get a little, like, miffed by it, I guess, just because it's like, did you think that the mass was just too stupid to understand that what the theme of the movie was going to be?
Yes, they truly did think that, because the reason the movie's even named King Kong and not just Kong, because Cooper wanted to name it just Kong. And others around him were worried that if they named it just Kong, it would sound too much like other actual docu-pics that were happening at the time. I say docu-pics with very loose quotes, everyone. Which were also like single-worded things. And so they were like, it needs a full name. Why don't we call it King of Beasts? Or like they were giving like a bunch of like big, fuller, more standard names. And he was like, no, I like the name I made up, Kong. It's dope. It needs to be in the title card. And they're like, the audience won't understand what a Kong is. What if we name it King Kong? Then you at least know that it's like a noun.
Okay.
Like, that is literally how stupid they thought the audience was. And granted, to an extent, the audience kind of was at the time.
To be fair, it is marketing. I watched a movie that a friend recommended called The Coffee Table that I wouldn't have watched otherwise.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to remember that movies are still, I mean, they're not brand new. Like, people now know kind of a little bit of the behind the scenes of movies. But we were so early in movies still that, like, the way things were being done could not keep up with telling people how the trick was done. To the point of, like, some people not knowing and, like, active publications having to release in the newspaper being like, there are not dinosaurs.
Yeah.
We made up the dinosaurs.
Well, and
sort of thing.
Back to the naming just a little bit. I was just thinking that we do see that a lot in, like, monster flicks.
Yes.
Is, like, Ticks, for example. The most recent one I watched. Or
Piranha. Yeah, no, like, it is a standard way of naming things now. Mostly because, like, there's not a lot of, like, quote-unquote mystery words, I think, anymore. And if it's a word you truly do not know, and it's clearly not in a different language, you can guess it's a name.
It's also they know who they're marketing to. They're not going to watch Blood-Sucking Parasite if the movie's called Ticks.
Yeah, no, exactly. And on top of that, they were, from the beginning, Cooper really wanted Kong to be a movie about filming things bigger than life, from a bunch of people who wanted to film things bigger than life.
And people who are arguably bigger than life.
But from people who were, exactly. So, like, everything in this movie, even if it does seem like, oh, that is a very traditionalist way of doing things, they were the one who made it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we even get it not just from the opening proverb, but we get the setting up of the strangeness of the ship and missing right away, that it's pretty straightforward.
It looks honestly pretty good for a film made in 1933.
Yeah, well, they also do a good job of, like, adding little bits to actually, like, kind of set up the danger. They're bringing gas bombs that could knock out elephants.
It is very well done, especially compared to the other stuff I normally watch from this decade.
Yeah, and it's a movie about technically making a movie.
It is, which makes...
Or trying to.
Which honestly does improve, I think, a little bit. A lot of the errors that are... There are errors occasionally. They were on a fast budget. Yep. They were on a very tight deadline, and a lot of that deadline was spent on animation. So...
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, we got to remember that this is so old that when they were filming their other docudramas, like, at one point, a tiger gets in their face. One of them, I can't remember who exactly it is up in the tree with the camera, like, inches from this tiger jumping up at them.
Yes.
Like, that's the thing is,
there's
like...
no zoom lens.
Yeah, there's no faking this. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
Exactly.
And, honestly, there are some things that are definitely cheesy and old, because as dangerous as this mission is, there's nothing more dangerous than having a flapper along with you.
How dare there be womans?
I know.
But I also love how... And this is a point that is another moment in where we were going to have to say, we are ignoring this current connotation of movies, because a lot of people do complain about the main female lead's, like, role in this movie. She is woman. She pretty. Yes. She is the original damsel in distress. Like, to the T.
Kind of. I mean,
there were damsels before her, and there will be damsels after her. However, when you think of a damsel in distress, she's in the top 5 at the minimum.
Yeah, in today's movie, she'd probably be the final girl, usually.
She probably would. And so, but without the context of modern day lenses, this was I won't say a feminist role, by any means. It was a very traditional role. However, the fact that the film openly is like, gosh dang it, can't find any, like, women strong enough and brave enough to go stand and be a sacrifice. Gosh dang it.
Yeah, because
it's very, like, it is surprisingly self-aware for the 1930s.
Yeah, because how dare a woman leave the kitchen?
Yeah, but also they're mad that they can't find a woman to leave the kitchen.
Yeah, before people get mad at me, that's a joke. I cook a lot, too.
It is.
Yeah, but I also like them setting up Denim this way, where he's really just, like, he's going to the soup line to find the most desperate girl he can, who's like, oh, I'll come with you. You'll feed me? That's good enough.
And he happens to find one of the best actresses at the time. So, that works out.
Yeah. But I think this era definitely sets up the idea of being found by a movie company to be a potential star.
No, this time period, especially, like, because remember, this film wasn't just made during the Depression, it came out during the worst part of the Depression.
Yes.
This was the bottom of the bottom. So this idea of, like, if you're just, like, slightly good enough, someone will come up and just whisk you off the street is a very appealing idea.
Yeah. Follow what the true crime says. Do not go to a second location like this woman.
There wasn't murderers yet. That wasn't a thing that had been invented. You could get in the man's car. It was fine. I watch a lot of these old movies. A lot of women make very bad choices about murder.
I mean...
No, there was definitely murder before this. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Fritz Lang's M came out in 1931, so like 2 years before this.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jack the Ripper was already a well-publicized and fictionalized character by this point in time. So,
why true crime now?
Oh, true crime has always been a thing. It has always been a thing. However, the movie portrayal of women was much less acknowledging of the idea of, like, men in cars with candy trying to lure you away.
Well, and on top of it, I mean, she faints, like, right away because of the stress of being accused of being a thief.
Yeah, that's, I think, a trope left over from the silent era that, honestly, I wish made a comeback.
The silent era, every single Western, there's, like, some woman fainting.
Again, though, that's because they are a lady. A damsel, if you will.
Spanish soap operas.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, it's a trend that has continued on to this day.
Yeah, but he does find his, like, perfect leading lady in Ann Darrow, where...
does.
she's an orphan. She has no one around her. She is truly alone in New York City.
How kidnappable.
Yeah. But also he's like very straightforward. He really is kind of creepy. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're coming along with." He doesn't even like ask her. He's like, "You're coming along with me. You're going to be perfect."
No, she just very complacent in her own kidnapping. It is a little funny.
Yeah, just a bit. But we're quickly introduced after this to the young sailor Captain Driscoll, where, to be fair, even though it is being cheesy, he is right. She is technically in the way. That's why he accidentally smacks her in the face.
And he quotes, "I punched ya."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but also like this is the part where like the acting dynamics are, unfortunately, even for the time, so glaringly obvious. Again, he does go on to be a much better actor. I have seen him in many, many a Western, and he is fantastic. And he is the suave, handsome young cowboy. He has not yet grown into that role, and he looks like he has, like, tape holding his eyebrows up. I know he doesn't. I know he just doesn't know what to do with his face yet. But she looks at him with such a longing. She has such she has such a good baby doll face. She has such a good, like, ability to act with just the eyes and just the eyebrows. And he's over here, like, kind of scrooging up one side of his face, puffing up just a little bit, and calling it a good day.
The no-nonsense man, women can't help but be a bother, which, again, those usually sets up that he's gonna fall in love with her.
Oh, it's so obvious. It's so cute.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, they do a lot of little things of setting up, like, the monkeys, kind of comparing it to Beauty and the Beast. Oh, look at who we got over here, Beauty and the Beast.
Which, I mean, they did from the title card. It was a theme that they wanted to really hammer home, which I honestly think was worth it, because especially later on when this movie came out to critics, there were a few who maybe didn't read the title card or missed several of the obvious hints of Beauty and the Beast theming, and went with a little bit different direction with it.
Yeah, we do also have to bring up, unfortunately, there is a cook on this ship named Charlie, who is the most stereotypical, pulled from a cartoon Chinese man.
Yeah, this is another one of those ones where the times did not age correctly or well.
Well, but it's something that, for some, it's probably not easy to look past, but honestly, it is such a small portion of this movie.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Because honestly, there's other problems that we'll have to talk about later.
Yes. Yeah. But the other thing that they do well is setting up the danger and the mystery of the island.
True. Honestly, the best part.
Yeah, that, hey, there's a lost civilization as regards the natives of, even though I don't think they ever say it in the movie as Skull Island, they say Skull Mountain.
They do call it Skull Mountain a lot.
Yeah, they never say Skull Island.
That's true, however, I know we did claim that this was a completely original work and that it was not based off any book. And while that is technically true, Cooper did manage to publish the book version of the screenplay 2 months before the movie came out. So technically, the book came first. And in the book, he does call it Skull Island, which is how everybody knows that it's called Skull Island. Because when the movie came out, the book was also very popular.
Well, and, I mean, it's got some old cheesy lines of how dangerous it is. No white man has ever seen. That's used a lot in a lot of those old adventure movies.
Yeah.
I mean, you see a little bit. Actually, so when I was watching this, I'm like, there's a lot of kind of similarities between this and Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, there's a reason Cannibal Holocaust pulled off of the whole, like, white saviorism thing pretty hard.
Except they're not.
Yeah, no, that's the whole point of Cannibal Holocaust, I believe.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing with a lot of those cannibal movies from the 80s.
Yes. And that is one of the unfortunate aspects is, and I've talked about it just a little bit, but this is a movie that suffers very badly from, it is not a perfect movie. The people creating it, the people writing it, directing it, were racist, as was their time period. And there is no getting around it. There are lots of people who have done very interesting and deep dives over the similarities and, like, the thought process behind all these people. However, with that said, if you're looking for an old-timey movie, this one's probably one of the lesser offensive ones. Still offensive, but...
Yeah.
You can at least forward through it.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I wouldn't throw Cooper and Shotasak as racist in it. It's just, it's the time era, and it's who you're selling it to. It's the 30s.
Yes. No, this was... And I hate saying it because it feels like a cop-out way of, like, letting this sort of, like, excuse behavior, but it's hard to excuse people who've been dead for a very long time. But this is a quintessential product of its time.
No, exactly. Every movie is a product of its time.
It was. And unfortunately, the 30s were racist.
Yeah. And this movie, or even nowadays, we see some of this where making a political joke within that era is not going to age very well later on, because you can't predict what's going to happen.
No, yeah.
But back to the movie and the danger, there is a little bit that I think I appreciate where the director has a line or a story of how there was a charging rhino and why he's the cameraman, because his last cameraman tucked away at the last second to get away from the rhino, whereas the rhino would have stopped for him.
Sure would have, my man.
No, it does. It stops where, like, the cameraman had been.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also a way to, like, really build him up as a badass and courageous man. And it's kind of a bit like the directors themselves. No.
A lot of people, including the writer, the producer and directors, admitted openly that they might have been self-inserting just a little bit into the movie. And part of it was just because this is topics they were both, like, really into, so why not fanfiction yourself into your own film?
We see it every day.
We sure do.
There are so many fanfics out there, and yeah.
I mean, if there wasn't fandoms, we wouldn't have the Titanic, so... The nerdiest of nerds will always create the best works. And these two men, despite being both war heroes and badass pilots, were also gorilla nerds.
I guess. But we arrive at Skull Island, and it's marked by a cool and haunting fog shot.
It looks so cool.
And this is why I think it works so well, too, is it adds tension and the potential horrors that await them, because they can't see what's ahead. They hear drumming in the distance, and the natives not showing up immediately also adds this mystery and tension of, like, they should have seen them. They should be there in the boats, like, waiting for them or coming to approach them.
You can hear them.
Yeah,
so they're definitely there.
And we also get the director forcing his passion to make Anne join them on their first trip to the island. Even though everyone's like, no, that's not a good idea, dude.
Yeah, well, at least someone said it wasn't a good idea before he does it anyway.
Yeah. But I do love how campy this movie is at times, too, because they just stroll into this village.
A lot of people feel like this movie helped create the first campy movie, and I see what they mean by it.
Oh yeah, no, 100%, because, like, the chanting of there are some good elements to the scene too, where they're building up the suspense, legitimizing their earlier conversation of, oh, this is intense, hey, that wall, it existed before these people, they've regressed to a more primitive state, they're preparing a sacrifice and a ritual, they're truly, there are some other things I like about this movie too, Sorry, back to the cheese.
Okay.
The way they're hiding is so stupid.
It's so... It's obvious to everyone, but the people in the movie.
Yeah. It's obvious to the natives because they see them immediately.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's very Scooby-Doo, and I can see where you're saying that this created, like, a cheesy camping movie, because we see this shot in so much stuff, like the Scooby-Doo live action, any, like, really bad horror film.
Honestly, a ton of action films that want a comedic point, this is the scene that they do.
Yeah, no, exactly. But the one thing I do appreciate is they're attempted to communication right away.
True.
They're not savages, they're just primitive and foreign, which is a very big tonal difference than a lot of, than, like, say, when we covered Red River.
Oh my god, yeah.
Where it's like, oh, them Indians.
Yeah, where, yes. And granted, it is not a perfect portrayal of natives in any sense. However, it is better than what was out there at the time. So I'm gonna give it a little bit of credit for doing something.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that I think makes this movie stand apart as well, is because it treats the natives like actual people. It doesn't treat them as, oh, we're better than them.
Sure.
For the most part, there's, like, one part where they're like, we shot volleys over them and they fled.
Yes. And I think a lot of that also comes down to the story's focus on Kong himself, as opposed to, like, having people to, like, be the chauffeur between them. A lot of these big creature features, if they had natives of any kind, often there was, like, specifically usually one native person, like, portrayed as, like, the go-between or the spiritual connector or something like that, where a lot of the issues usually surfaced and became apparent.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, they are so focused on Kong that we really don't have time to look at anybody else.
No. And I can see where people are like, well, it's a bunch of black people dressed as gorillas. Of course it's racist.
Yes, I ran into a lot of articles discussing that very topic. And yeah, this is not great, but compared to the one that people say is supposed to be its quote-unquote predecessor, I will let it go.
All right. But they do also do a good job of setting up what the desire of Kong is going to be, because this ritual is to prepare the bride of Kong.
Yes.
And there's a line that I thought was a little comedic and kind of dumb. Blondes are scarce around here. Like, no shit, you don't say.
Yeah, I appreciate that we acknowledge that, I guess.
Well, I think it's the movie's attempt to try and set up, like, kind of a cultural clash where the natives are still in their old ways and they still believe in the sacrifice. We see it in a lot of, like, folk horror films.
It definitely is King Kong folk horror. I believe nowadays he is, as King Kong has moved himself into folkdom himself.
I think it would have folk horror elements, because usually in folk horror, one of the themes is the old ways are always right, and King Kong is not part of that.
That's true. That is kind of the whole point of King Kong.
No, exactly. But we'll quickly go back to the boat, which there's a lot of other build-up here that I think is really good, too. There's the nervousness that keeps putting the two lovebirds together, where they're like, we know they want you. We gotta watch you.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And I will say, the romance is a bit forced, but it's the 30s. You gotta have some of the smoochy to it.
For sure. There's also just a standard as far as, like, what people were expecting. Granted, we were still very early in film, but there was already, like, expectations when you went to a movie. If you have a beautiful lady and a beautiful starring man, obviously they are going to smooch. Yeah. That is required. And this movie is like, yeah, well, might as well check the box early.
Just a little bit. And honestly, with the natives sneaking onto the ship, pretty cool scene.
Yeah.
But even, like, her scream is not muffled, and I know Driscoll went off to go tend to something, but you'd think that they'd have someone at least watching her still.
One would think, and yet, watching many of these old-timey movies, I question so much about just people's ability to supervise anything, ever.
Or even have, like, really critical thought at times.
Yes, there seems to just be a lack of, like, if this, then that processing.
Actually, it's that idea that in horror movies don't exist.
That's true. And also, remember that, like, horror movies were still a very young idea. So, yeah, and also just, I don't know, movies in general during the late 20s and early 30s, there just wasn't a lot of if this, then that for the characters to think about. Again, the audience had their hand held through the whole movie, usually. So, like, there's no reason for your character to be smart, because we're just telling you the story.
Well, I don't agree with that on this one specifically.
This is definitely a mold breaker for the standard.
Because there is a lot of, we did this, so this has to happen, because it's like, hey, we brought this woman on board. Well, now we have to bring her on to, or it's the director's hubris of he's pushing things too far, and because he's doing this, shit has to hit the fan, like bringing her on the island. If they didn't know that she was there, well, then they wouldn't have come to the boat.
Yes. No, Kong is a good example of if this, then that, but for a specific person and or just the audience. The other characters don't necessarily need brain cells.
No, not
There's
at
no
all.
problem solving for any of the background characters, because we don't care about them at this point in time in history.
Yeah, like Charlie, who is gone after this point, because we do get a little bit of her, like, I think it's kind of funny because there's not really a muffled scream, but
yeah,
she does tear one of the bracelets off, which leads to them being like, okay, because they kidnapped her, she pulled it, now they know what happened. And unfortunately, it is all a bit stagey, and even then, there was that line, crazy black men been here.
Yeah, which was honestly the title of one of the reports I read about this movie and its racist views. I understand why this movie is used as, like, the base point. It is a very influential movie. And while it has these not great lines and scenes and characters in it, It's not so thick that you're having to weed through the whole damn movie.
It's no Birth of a Nation, which for those
Thank
who
God.
are unfamiliar, Birth of the Nation, it was the first narrative film that we had, too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. What a time.
Yeah, unfortunately, our film history is
It's not great.
balled up in a lot of bad shit, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
now it's time for The Bride of Kong.
now it's time for the best part of Kong.
I still think the set is really cool. Just
It
the
looks
giant
so
wall. I will bitch about it in a bit.
I know you will, because I will too.
But they really are ramping up the intensity in music for Kong.
Yes.
Which I think is a good time to talk about the music and special effects. Because
Definitely.
originally, the music was supposed to be stock. But the composer, Max Steiner, said that nothing would fit this movie.
Correct.
And this movie and this man are the ones who pioneered film music where the score was tied to the themes and actions in the movie.
And also, this movie was one of the first ones to solidify in the public's mind, and also I think in directors' minds, that having a true score to a film, especially what they called a talkie, which was a film where you talked in it, did not ruin.
Don't say.
I know. But there was a fairly firm belief in a lot of directors at the time that having big music in a talk film would ruin the film because people wouldn't understand where the music was coming from. It was a pretty common held belief that, again, the audience is really stupid and you need to hold their hand through everything, and they were worried that if they played music, people would ask where the music's coming from, like who's playing a full orchestra on this train, essentially.
Well, and they were also concerned that the music would make Kong sound cartoonish, which I don't
get that.
Yeah, I don't get that at all, because maybe it's just our perception of what, like, quote-unquote cartoony music is. Like, it's not the Benny Hill, or is that the Benny Hill run where it's like da-da-da-da-da-da-da?
Yeah, it's not.
I hate that thing.
It's not that.
That is the musical equivalent of the Wilhelm scream to me.
I can understand that. I think a lot of their concern on quote-unquote making it toony was because during silent films, the music that went with it made it more either serious or dramatic, and but in much more of a way than we see even now, because it was the literal only thing you were listening to if you got lucky and it had a score. Some of them, there was nothing. You just watched a film in silence. How exciting. But... Well,
no.
There was supposed to be a person playing the piano.
I know, that's what I'm going to dispel, is that even though we call them silent films, there usually was a score that was associated, / usually there was a live musician who was performing with them. Usually.
However, we all know that there was plenty of movies that you got to listen to nothing while you watched the film, for various of reasons. But the music that went with it was almost stereotyped. There was kind of a generic, like, theme that went for different things. And so I can understand why they were worried that the epic music that would, like, the stock music that they were originally looking for to go with Kong would be perceived as, like, a kiddie, action-y sort of movie.
Yeah.
Instead of, because they didn't know they were going to have this amazing score.
Yeah, in a way how, like, Godzilla's theme wasn't originally Godzilla's theme. It was originally written for the army, but because we saw it with Godzilla...
It's now Godzilla's.
Yeah, exactly.
The music in this movie worked so well and was so popular that it changed a lot of big directors' minds, and they actively said, well, I saw Kong, I loved it, I love the music, I will now be doing that. And, like, that is a huge Kong is the main reason we have full orchestra scores to most films.
No, that's exactly what it is. And on top of that, it was a pioneer in sound effects, because it was the first of its kind, because no one had a sound library back then. And
you had to do it all yourself.
Yeah, and sound designer Murray Spivak pioneered that. Like, King Kong's famous roar is a combination of, I think he said, like, a lion and a leopard, and, like, or a lion and a tiger, and one of them sped up and one of them slowed down, and they had to do, here's the thing, for everyone, it's so easy now to, like,
put them in,
click a couple buttons and get the sound effect you want. In this one, they had to do all this by hand, like, pull the tape a little bit slower, pull it faster, like, physically do this stuff.
Yes, and the idea of doing sound effects was by no means this is a first. However, doing them in movies was.
Mhm.
Sound effects were usually thought of more as like a radio show's thing, and usually the voice actor during the radio show would be doing their own sound effects.
Mhm.
Or you get lucky and you have someone off to the side doing them while you did your voice acting if it was chaotic enough.
Well, and that's the thing too, is both Steiner and Spivak knew that they didn't want one to overpower the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so Spivak Steiner changed his music to allow the special effects or the sound effects to actually star in parts of it too, because this is where I think King Kong really shines, is this build up, because there is sudden silence.
Yes.
And it's such a big, impactful moment.
Yes, it's huge. This is also one of the very first films to actively record music, sound effects, and voices on different sets, as opposed to having like the music and the sound effects happening at the same time on the same recording on like the same mic.
Yeah.
They separated all three out, which is part of the reason why everything sounds so good still to this day.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And finally, as well, Kong is here.
Kong has arrived!
Which, a lot of cool close-ups and matte shots. And
it looks great.
I mean,
I love old-timey props and creatures, because even when it's very obvious that it's like a plastic toy fighting another plastic toy, someone had to find that plastic toy and then like move its little legs.
Yeah, it's like Robot Chicken.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, even then, like Ray Harryhausen said, the effects were used to tell as a storytelling method back then, instead of just being these pretty little shots. That, I mean, honestly, we do see a lot of that in like Marvel and stuff too, where it's pretty to be pretty instead of being interesting. Like,
yes,
it's like comparing, like, I'd say any Marvel movie to like Arrival, where Arrival, everything is symbolic. There, it's not just visually there; it's there to tell a story. Like,
oh yeah, no, I definitely see what you mean. I also think that people weren't expecting not Godzilla. We haven't gotten to Godzilla yet.
Well, we did, but we should probably redo Godzilla. But
we should, but I meant in time of this world.
Yeah.
No, I don't think people expected Kong to look as good as he did. Because, granted, there were other big creatures before this, but for the most part, they were pretty static in look. They were very beginner claymation, which, not bad. It's just stiff. Kong actually looks pretty good. His model was mostly made out of, like, a mix between wire, clay, wood, and rabbit skin, which even nowadays people have a hard time recreating how like soft he looks.
No, exactly. Well, and that's what's cool about watching the production 601. The reason our RKO production 601, the reason I say definitely watch that documentary is because Weta Workshop, the people who did Lord of the Rings, in case you don't know, worked on the documentary and went back and recreated the effects because there was no documentation on how it was made. King Kong was such under heavy wraps that O'Brien, there's no interviews with him how he made it. They didn't save any of the documentation. And also there's no like behind the scenes footage or stills because they were trying to keep everything so hush hush.
Yeah.
Which it really is sad.
It is, especially because Kong eventually went on to be such an icon, and the difference visually between Kong 1 and Kong literally any other is dramatic.
Yeah, well, and even Kong's aluminum frame, or his armature as it's called, had to be done from scratch, which is absolutely impressive.
It's amazing, especially in a time period where normally we would have just borrowed from someone else's set. And granted, they did borrow a lot of stuff, but Kong wasn't one of them. They made Kong from the ground up, and they also thought about what different shots they were going to make from the get-go, which back then was kind of a unique thing to do.
Yeah, well, because you also had, I think there were like 2 scales of King Kong, and then you had his large headshots for the close-ups, which...
And then they had an arm.
Yeah, right, for the one scene.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's what's fascinating too, is they talk about how, and you can actually see it in some of the later scenes where the hot lights deteriorate Kong and they have to go and fix him up ever so often. Yeah,
no, don't get me wrong. Kong is not the best looking model I've ever seen in my life. However, Kong's model is so amazingly perfectly blended between a giant gorilla and a very humanistic, like, features. Like, the way they made him walk, his facial expressions with the large model were so impactful that I don't even think they themselves realized it was going to look like that.
That's the little bit of battle there, too. Cooper wanted Kong to be more animal, and O'Brien wanted it to be more human.
I'm glad that they couldn't agree, because it honestly worked for the best.
Well, Cooper won.
Well, yes. Yeah. Cooper did win.
But that being said, the close-ups, and even the faraway shots, how he's moldable, like with his eyebrows, he's actually able to be slightly expressive. Which
changed Kong dramatically for audiences. People actually felt that Kong was more of a actual character in the film as opposed to just a monster. No. That literally just his facial expressions were what changed it for people.
Exactly. I mean, you go to the 50s and you got the giant Gila monster, them, Attack of the 50-foot woman has more character because it's a woman. But...
Well, yeah, she actually has eyebrows.
Yeah, no, exactly. But there was some other stuff that I liked in the commentary where Cooper mentioned that we're now too critical of visual effects compared to storytelling nowadays. And honestly, I have to agree with that because really, I've started becoming a little bit more annoyed when people are the effects aren't as good as they could have been. Well, that's fine. But, and I mean, I even fall into that trap too. But when it actively prevents people from watching a movie because it's I don't watch the Japanese live actions, the effects aren't very good.
Sure.
Well, that's because they don't have the budget of the US and that's how a lot of other countries are too.
Sure, but I also would argue that, when there is the budget, that attention to a humanistic part to something that is essentially a main character is so important that it can make audiences riot. I'm thinking very strongly of the, quote-unquote remake of The Lion King, where none of the lions had any facial expressions and people rioted.
Yeah, or you go too far and you make the cats with furry titties.
Okay, see, that's different because they were meant to look like that from the get-go.
No.
Yeah.
They were meant to be wearing makeup and not be anthropomorphic cats.
Yes, but I see that one, at least I see how we got there, whereas the other way around is, I would argue that it's the difference between being criticized because your main actress can't move her eyebrows in Twilight versus your main actor moves his face so much he scares small children in Christine.
Good.
Those are your two extremes. And finding that balance point is so important even nowadays. And it's amazing that, it hasn't become such, a standardization.
It's like the uncanny valley that you talk of every now and then.
It is. It is exactly the uncanny valley. And it changes also, humans want to personify things. It's, part of our, brains wants to personify things. And if you move its eyebrows just a little bit, we will slap a personality on it.
Yeah. I mean, look at Plank from Ed, Ed, and Eddie.
Honestly, yes. People, were obsessed with that stupid plank of wood, including people in the show.
Yeah.
And, most creature features, I would argue even after Kong, were, because of how the limitations they had with either budget or time or knowledge of how to make, a giant head of, and, have it, anthropomorphized, really changed people's perception of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's also something that's when you base something off of something you're not used to. I learned recently that both the recent Godzillas, the Adam Wingard legendary Godzilla and Godzilla -1, are their movements and their antics are heavily inspired by the director's cats.
Yes, which is fantastic.
No, exactly. And I think that goes to say, because Harryhausen also mentioned that if you make something too realistic, it becomes mundane. And
I would agree.
And I think that's what's great about all that stuff is even though the new Godzilla looks fabulous.
He does. I would argue the new Kong also looks fabulous. However, because it looks a lot like a normal gorilla, I would argue it's not as cool as this one.
Yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, it's adding that personality that even if it's subtle, you can pick it up. And that's why, if you go and watch the 2000s Godzilla.
Yes.
It's so stiff and there's nothing to it.
A perfect example.
Hell, even if you go between Godzilla and Gamera, there's a personality to Gamera.
Yes. No, I think those are great examples, especially with Godzilla, because especially the original live-action-y ones, he's rubber, and there's not a lot of personification you can do when you're stuck in a hot suit.
Exactly. The group does finally show up, and they're late, but they force their way through.
Here to save the day.
Yeah, really good for the time, though. I mean...
Yeah, honestly.
Kind of. They're there.
They made it.
But now it is into the jungle they go to find Kong and Anne. More so for Anne, but...
Well, we'd like to think it's for Anne, but they are here to shoot a documentary.
Yeah. Well, and it's dark and spooky and already mysterious because, there's dinosaurs, many reused from O'Brien's creation.
Yeah, and also partially there because, again, Cooper was really into kimono dragons.
I mean, you've already...
He loved this sort of shit.
I'm sure it was more of a budgetary thing of, like, we already have these, we don't need to make another monster.
No, it 100% was, because he originally was quoted as saying that he actually wanted just a normal Komodo dragon to be, like, in the movie, and they told him no.
That would have been great. But I do appreciate that all the men are fearless in their charge. Well, actually, here's the thing. They're there to shoot a movie, but they didn't bring the camera for this part.
No, they didn't. Okay, this movie, especially the men, are all portrayed in a very standard fairy tale sort of way, where, like, they are action first and things just happen to work out for them.
Or no, it doesn't work out for a lot of them.
That's true. A lot of them. But again, fairy tale logic is we're only really invested in a few people here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And honestly, this is the one part where I say the effects, even for the time, feel pretty bad, where the tracking of the close-ups is a bit rough.
It is, but I will give some leeway to also, like, this movie's fairly long for the time period, too. Like, when they originally shot it, it was a full 100 minutes before it got cut down by multiple sources. And for the time, for how much budget they had for being in the back alley, I'll give it to them. This is fairly impressive for a bunch of stop motion in a cramped time.
And during the Great Depression, too.
Where, like, literally we're eating, ketchup soup. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to go back through my Depression cookbook.
Just ketchup soup.
Yes. But honestly, it does feel... I also kind of appreciate it because it tries to make the dinosaurs feel bigger than they are and also makes the men a bit bumbling at times.
It does, and part of it was because Cooper wanted Kong to be different sizes depending on his environment. Mm-hmm. Again, he wanted him anywhere between 18 and 40-something feet tall, and his argument for it was he wasn't going for realism, he was going for excitement. And I kind of get it.
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, they're getting picked off one by one thing after another. They get a raft, the raft gets turned over by a plant eater that eats people for some reason.
Surprise!
But also, like, the human stop motion is pretty decent, too.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong, it's not spectacular, and it's by no means the best stop motion of it, even of its day. Mm-hmm. But, for what it is, it's fine, it's watchable. Well,
and it's also impressive, the composite shots, because
those are honestly what gets me.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of rear projection that's put through, like, multiple layers of glass and reshot.
Which, for the time, was a very new technique. Mm-hmm. Most of the time when stuff was in stop motion, think OG Godzilla, things were done on a tiny set. And while that is used in a lot of this movie, they did a lot of work to have live actors be with those models.
No, exactly. And also, it's the first time RKO did rear projection, specifically the scene of Anna in the tree.
Yeah, it looks really good, and it's very impressive. Granted, if you know how it's done, it's blatantly obvious. However, for the time, I'm very impressed. And if no one had told me, I don't think I would have caught it.
No, it's still really, really well done. And honestly, it's nature horror, which isn't a genre I generally like, but it does it in an interesting, exciting way. Because when we get to the T-Rex fight, this is establishing King Kong as really being a king. And honestly, the effects are fascinating as well, because they talk about how with the armatures, because you're moving them, they have to be like screwed down to the board or to the ground. I can't. Yeah. Whatever it's shot on is what it has to be screwed into, and so you have to plan out its steps in advance. But King Kong does this thing where he does like this somersault and flings the T-Rex over or from his back to his front, and that's like
it looked really cool.
Oh no, it is super cool. And the thing you have to remember is they don't have the technology to put wires that you can edit out that well.
No, you would have seen wires.
No, exactly. And also, they brought up something, and I need to do more looking into O'Brien, because he also has... Mm-hmm. That's the thing about these directors or some of the directors and creators of this time frame, is they were just kind of like just outside the mold of stuff, because O'Brien had like 5 or 6 different careers before he was doing films.
Yeah,
and they said this whole fight scene with King Kong came from his boxing days.
I desperately need to know how, because granted, it is more of a standard human style fight than like how a gorilla would have fought, or arguably a T-Rex, because honestly the T-Rex doesn't do a lot of fighting, he just kind of stands around and yells.
Gets his ass whooped.
He really does just get his ass handed to him. But I desperately wish to know what he means by that.
I don't know. But also in the scene too, when Kong saves Anne, it's his gentle way. It's him showing that he's also gentle on top of being a badass.
Yes, that's true.
And this is also the part where we get a little cut back to the entrance where the natives have run off because they fired a couple suppression volleys over them. And
oh, sure.
Yeah, just like, okay, cool, whatever.
I appreciate the attempt at, like, fully rounded storytelling for this movie, because honestly, a lot of creature features, especially from, honestly, all the way into the 40s, don't really bother telling you anything other than just having, like, the normal damsel and then, like, just monster shots for the majority of it. So, like, I appreciate the attempt at a full rounded story here.
Yeah, like, the giant Gila monster, I'm going to go back to that one, or... Actually, the Night of the Killer Shrews actually does have some story to it, but it falls back into, it starts with the story, and then it's like, oh, nope, they're stuck on the island, and that's where the movie goes.
And then, like, the last, like, 5 minutes is the, like, quote-unquote wrap-up of the story. Yeah. This one at least has, like, some version of a plot that, like, we kind of follow the other characters.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't care about them. We're only really here for Anne.
It at least gives us an update of, okay, they're safe, so now we can focus back on Anne again.
Exactly.
Because we do get to Kong's Lair, which is a really cool set. Very haunting.
Very.
A lot of even the jungle shots, a lot of it was inspired by Gustave Doré's illustrations, where it's very heavy foreground and then lighter and lighter background.
It looks so cool.
It is such a cool style. And honestly, I do like the scene too because... One, we get a cool monster that's kind of like a dinosaur, but not. But it's also to show that even Kong's lair is not safe for Kong.
That's true. And it's something that I think the newer Kongs do not really, like, find a way to portray well. Like, there'll be a couple of, like, cool Kong fights, and then we, like, leave Skull Island with Kong in tow, usually.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, despite the fact that out of the full run of the movie, we're not on Skull Island for that long, we do get, like, a full dynamic of, like, what Kong is, like, what his role in the ecosystem is. And it's not this, like, benevolent, overseen, great thing. He's actively having to fight for stuff.
He's the apex creature.
He is, but he's also being beat the hell up by, like, other stuff. Like, other things are not just leaving him alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They still think they can... well, to be fair, that creature's not going for Kong. It's going for Anne.
Exactly. But, like, you get what I mean? Like, normally, I think, like, the newer Kongs spend a lot of time, like, oh, he fights one big other thing on the island. And then it's, you know, oh, well, he's the king of the island. Nothing's gonna touch Kong.
Yeah.
Not in this version of Kong. Other stuff's like, I think I could take him.
Granted, I've only seen this one and Peter Jackson's, which that one's way too long for what it is.
I fully agree. I think it should have been the same length as this one.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, we get to see a different side of Kong, too, where we've seen him beat shit up.
Yeah. It's cool.
He's gentle, but he's also a curious little George.
He is, and this, like, little interaction between the curiosity, the gentleness, and then also the power is what directly inspired later on Mighty Joe Young. Like,
No.
They saw that, they're like, I love it, but what if he's not evil?
Well, even
to
then,
an extent.
Kong's not even evil in this. He's just a creature living his life. He got presented women. He take women pretty.
Yes.
Me look at titties.
Yes, and it is the titty scene that began the scouring of Kong.
Yeah, which, here's the thing, is, like, I know the scene was censored originally because it was too risque, because...
It sure was.
Oh no, how dare we show part of the upper boob.
Yes. How could we? This is the 1930s, damn you.
Yeah, well, and also, here's the thing is, this is one of the parts where I'm gonna bring up some very stupid questions.
I don't know if I have answers on this time.
So, one, this is not the first woman that they've given to Kong.
No.
Obviously, because they have a ritual for it.
They do.
How, is he just curious because it's the first white woman he's seen?
Okay, so this is the only one that I kind of have an answer for you, and it's only because I did read several of other people's, like research and looking into from the unfortunate racist aspect that he is a giant gorilla, which in the 1930s was a pretty standard stand-in for a black man. And there's also a keen interest in a white woman, which was another pretty standard stereotype for black men.
So basically, he's just Terry Crews and white chicks.
That is some people's argument. And by some, I mean quite a few.
Okay.
However, after reading and listening to people who knew Cooper and Cooper's inspiration himself, I don't think he directly meant that to be the thought.
I guarantee you he did not mean that to be his thought.
I know that was not his conscious thought. However, a lot of articles did point out, and I think they are good points to take, that he was very much a man living in the 30s, and it is impossible to get away from the culture and time that you are in. And so even if he did not intend it, he did accidentally put these themes in the movie.
Okay.
And so, granted, I fully believe that Cooper, who claims to be Kong's father, essentially. I
mean, he is.
He is. He very much adamantly is no, it is a Beauty and the Beast love story. He is a beast. Okay. And I'm willing and happy to leave it at that, because there's a lot to get through in this goddamn movie, and I don't have time to go through it from another lens.
No, I get that, but I also have other dumb questions too, how many women has Kong done this to? / how long do they last? Because Anne almost dies, real quickly, because the moment Kong's gone, a giant flying lizard comes to get her. It's a pterodactyl, but... Yeah,
okay. With some preface, I have read the original Kong book. It has been decades since I read it. Okay. I don't remember them, saying anything specific about it, and I know the movie doesn't specifically say either. I think it's kind of the same idea as Godzilla, where it's been happening since time began, sort of quote-unquote concept, is these people's folk history is their god.
Is Kong the reason the old civilization fell?
It is not directly implied in this movie. I will let you watch other Kong movies and come up with your own conclusion, because they do kind of explore it in a few other Kongs. Granted, most of them just end up being Kong beating the shit out of other creatures. However, the second one does imply that there are other Kong creatures.
Oh no, I'll get into that. I watched Son of Kong.
I'm glad you did. I hate Son of Kong.
Yeah, I have a little thing, I have a couple notes on it.
Okay, but anyway, if it's implied that he has a child, then it's implied he has a father.
So, it also implies he has another woman, folks. So why are they sacrificing? What are the women giving to Kong that the other apes aren't giving?
I think Cooper's intention was less of a sexual thing and more of an intellectual toy.
More to show that Kong is a very innocent, curious creature and not looking for death by snoo-snoo.
Yes.
Providing death by snoo-snoo.
Correct. Yes. Again... This is the inspiration of Mighty Joe Young, which I think if Cooper had managed to, have more of an interaction with Mighty Joe Young, we would have had a better, talk about, his interpretation of, where they got wrong his Kong versus, what they did interpret correctly. Because I do think the love story of Mighty Joe Young is probably what Cooper was going for.
Okay. Which, honestly, I didn't realize that Mighty Joe Young, the one that I was slightly familiar with, was a remake.
Oh, yeah, I think a lot of people didn't realize that movie's hella old.
Yeah. It's just one of those ones where you saw it as parts of it as a kid, and it's
I think the same thing happened with Dr. Dolittle, to be honest with you, because my husband didn't realize that was also a remake.
I didn't realize it was a remake
and it's one of my favorite movies.
I know.
Granted, it's not a good movie, but I love it. I love the two-headed llama so fucking much.
We'll do it at some point.
Or, eventually, it's a musical you don't want to...
Oh, fuck. God damn it. It's
the most musical-y of musicals. There's a whole musical about the two-headed llama. There's a whole song about the Push Me Pull You.
Oh, god damn it.
There's also a whole song where they talk about how the whales push the tectonic plates back together and they save this island.
Fuck?
You thought you knew the story of Dr. Dolittle? You sure don't.
I knew about the two-headed llama because you sent it to me about 20 times.
I love that llama so much. No, you didn't know about the giant lunar moth that takes Dr. Dolittle to the moon?
No, is that where Dark Souls got its moth from?
I don't know. Actually, probably not, because it's a lunar moth and it's a pretty obvious connection.
No, it's, well, it is a lunar moth in Dark Souls, but I know specifically, they stole it from the Fairy Village arc in Berserk.
There you go. You don't know about the giant pink sea snail that they ride.
Yes, I do.
Oh, you've seen the inside of the giant pink sea snail?
I did not see the inside of it.
They go inside the pink sea snail.
Of course. Is it bigger on the inside?
Oh, yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It's a cool puppet, though.
We'll do it at some point.
You're gonna hate it. You're gonna hate every second. It's a very long movie, and it's all a musical.
God damn it. Alright. But anyway, back to Kong. Driscoll's to the rescue.
Yes, thank God. The handsome man has come.
They escape via dummies into the water.
Yay!
The dummies they use are like the same level of effect with The Fugitive.
Yeah.
Where Harrison Ford falls out and it's just so blatantly bad.
It is, but I kind of appreciate it because I do think it gives the movie a bit of a charm that even for the time I think was kind of appreciated. It wasn't meant to be lighthearted, but it did kind of lighten the mood just a little bit. Just a bit.
But also, here's the other thing that I find really stupid too is Kong is able to get through the gate.
Yes, he is.
Real fucking easily.
Yeah, that wall ain't doing shit.
No, exactly.
That wall doesn't do shit. Also, if you're being a very cynical person watching this movie, Kong in several different angles could have just stepped over the wall, so
No, exactly. And also, I do like that the director reminds me of someone I know. I'm not going to say names.
Okay, good
because
for you.
It's one of those people who they see something and they're like, oh, I can make money off that. That's an opportunity for me to do something with it. Where it's like, oh shit, okay, well, I'm not going to make my movie. I'm going to capture that thing.
Yes. No, that is, I think we all know someone who has the mindset of everything they see, they think about how it could be a profit. And, this man is the epitome of that because he looked at Kong, he barely escapes from. And he thinks to himself, man, this movie that I could have been shooting this whole time and I failed to, if I came back, I know I could make a banger movie. But I could make more money if I sell him to the circus.
Well, it's even worse. It's like, oh, you've been trapped. You've been kidnapped by a giant ape. You've been attacked by creatures. You know what? You're gonna be bait.
Yeah, I appreciate that. They don't even give her an option.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also,
she's the most damselly damsel, so of course there's not a lot she does other than just lightly flail.
No, it's awful.
It's pretty bad.
Also, we do have to bring up the last little bit of this in this movie.
We will. Yeah.
Is while the kills are cool and in a different context would have been awesome.
Yes.
The entire population of natives gets absolutely fucked over by them.
Yeah.
Kong kills a good chunk of them.
Yeah, you weren't the only person to notice that. On top of all of the very interesting research that I read of people who had gone through and really looked at Kong from a racial lens. There was also a lot of people who noticed that Kong's treatment of the natives in this movie, and not just Kong, but the movie's treatment of natives in this movie, not great, since literally they all die, and theoretically they've lived on this island with Kong for generations.
They survive. A good chunk of them survive. There's a handful that die, but I will say even, there is one cool part in this scene too, where King Kong throws a branch into the foreground.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's so well done.
It's pretty cool. And then quickly back to the idea of censoring. It was not only the Tétés that got censored, a lot of the deaths were also censored. A lot of specifically Kong munching and snapping people was considered too graphic for several audiences.
Fucking prudes.
Yeah. This is something that I want to bring up now because every time I will bring up oh, by the way, that got censored. It wasn't got censored for that location. The whole movie got censored, and it wasn't we'll just send out version B to, Mississippi doesn't like tits, so we'll just give, Mississippi the titless version. No, they did it to all of them.
And we have to explain a little bit of film history around this, too, and the distribution system of the day.
Yes.
Movies weren't distributed nationwide or worldwide. They were set in circuits where usually it started at one coast.
Yep.
It worked its way across the state, or across, the country.
Yes. And this one started at the...
New York.
Yes. And worked its way across. And so by the time it hit Hollywood, a gigantic chunk of the movie had been cut and lost. By the time they hit snip on the film, it was, okay, well, that's the way the movie is now. Yeah. And so when I say lost... At the time, it was probably not lost. However, because it just kept making its way, and no one had been what if we had the whole movie? So it just kind of disappeared for a while.
Specifically, the famous spider scene that we only have a still of.
We do, only unfortunately. That is the big lost portion. Most of it was found in Philadelphia much later. So, thankfully, we have now the full amount.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yeah. But also, this is an interesting part because the way they address technology, and I know it's your stereotypical adventure film.
It is.
But technology is stronger than Kong, and as we know how the movie ends, technically civilization is better than nature. Yeah, how nature intends things to be.
Well, I mean, that is, other than just being a Beauty and the Beast story, that is kind of the whole, like, base bone of it, was them talking about, like, how their inspiration was, like, you know, these gorillas are being just wrecked by modern civilization, which was back in the 30s, so that's really saying something.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't even wrecked by today's standards. It was, like, lightly wrecked. Yeah.
We gotta remember, King Kong is a movie about gorillas, really.
It really is. It's a man who really just wanted to film gorillas, and they told him no. So he made his own gorilla.
Yeah. But King Kong's captured. They're going to be millionaires, and it's back to New York City with a kind of third title card. That's another thing I forgot to say. There's two title cards in the beginning of the movie. Like, in case you didn't know you're watching King Kong, you're watching King Kong.
Yeah, that's true. And, okay, so part of that was because intermissions were still very much a thing. And it was expected that you would have a moment to stand up, stretch, walk around, maybe get a snack. Peanuts were popular at the time.
Boiled or roasted?
I believe boiled. But I honestly don't know. No one has ever, like, specifically told me. Maybe it's different. Maybe they were boiled in Louisiana and they were roasted in New York. I don't know.
I'll look at my Depression-era cookbook.
Yeah, you let me know, because I know that this was the time period where, like, peanuts and Coke were starting to become a thing.
Where roast raccoon is the mainstay.
Alright, from my neck of the woods, that still makes it into a cookbook, but...
I've talked to someone we work with, and he's like, oh yeah, I had raccoon a few years ago. I'm like,
we live in a town that used to host the International Squirrel Cook-Off.
Yeah, I know, I've been there.
Yeah, but we can't host it anymore, it got too big. We had to move it. It was too popular.
Okay.
I'm not kidding, they had to move it to the fairgrounds, they can't hold it at the square anymore.
Oh, yeah, that's the only place I've been to, it is the fairgrounds.
Oh, well, you went after it got real big. Mm-hmm. That's okay, that's honestly where it belongs, is the fairground. Jesus. It used to be on the square, though.
But I will say, it takes us an hour and 22 minutes to get back to New York City.
I kind of appreciate that, though.
Yeah, and I also like that they're still, like, the way they frame, because we know what Kong is.
We do.
But setting it up and framing the disbelief that, again, one is Beauty and the Beast, but
yes,
what is the show going to be? Because one of the comments is, we're paying $20 for this show.
$20 would have been a fuck ton of money at the time.
I figured it out.
Thank you.
It was about $500 in today's money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's like the amount to go to a big name concert.
Yeah, to just basically go and look at a giant ape.
I would pay it, though. Okay, but, like, I don't have, like, don't get me wrong, I don't have $500 to spend on literally anything. However, like, if I was told a new species of giant fauna had been found, and, like, I could pay money to go see it, hell yeah, sign me up. I'm a zoo lover. I want to go see the thing. I just don't have $500 to go see the thing. Yeah,
and it's a single thing. It's not...
That's true. I mean, I assume, based off of my knowledge of A, stage shows, and B, circuses, that the idea was definitely to have other, like, things happen to Kong.
Yeah, I just realized I should have asked my cousin when I saw her over the holiday. She used to work at the Henry Dorley Zoo, specifically for the apes.
Oh, she could have told us so much.
Yeah, well, actually, so I learned something fascinating, and thank you for this info, Buggy. Apparently, the Omaha Zoo has a male ape problem, or specifically their gorillas. It's a thing around the zoos is they have too many males to females, and so like they have to like really.
They got too many sororities or fraternities.
Yeah. Basically, they just have to like be very careful on because like they can't just ship it to another zoo because that other zoo also has the same problem. There's just not enough female gorillas going around, I guess.
That is a sad problem to have.
Yeah.
I was not aware.
I was not aware of it either.
No, but like based off of my knowledge of zoos, my knowledge of old-timey circuses and how horrible they were, and also side show acts and stage performing at the time, I would assume that $500 was not just me sitting for an hour looking at Kong. We're gonna hit him with something we're going to feed him something.
Or they're going to have some other act in front of Kong while he's in the background.
Yeah, there'll be a stand-up comedian.
They do, what's the movie? Young Frankenstein, where he comes out and does the tap dance.
There'll be someone tap dancing for sure. There'll be a slight vaudeville act, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Well, also what's interesting with this shot too, or this scene too, is Kong is kind of crucified here too.
Yes, and I don't think that was not intentional in like the way they have decided to tie him down, because they could have done like a more like chains to the ground sort of situation, because we do see that in a few other creature features before this one. Yeah,
you see it later on in like the 1961 Gorgo flick, which is basically the UK's mashing of King Kong and Godzilla,
which is beautiful. I love that they managed to combine those two things
in a very interesting way, I thought. So.
Oh yeah, it's not bad.
Shout out to Paul from SB Film Viewers who introduced me to that movie.
Oh, very good, very good. But no, I think it was very intentional, not only to have Kong stand in that shape, which I mean, it's the 30s, it's America, it's people. I don't think anyone was lost on the symbolism there.
He's the Jesus of the Pacific Islands,
of just nature.
Not even Pacific Islands. Because I looked up, this is like south of the Philippines, if I remember right.
I mean, that was kind of where they were originally filming anyway. They were kind of comfortable in that region, so like, I get it.
Yeah.
But also, I think having him chained this way makes the chains more noticeable. So there's more steel having to hold Kong still, making it seem like, look at how impressive the structure is that we also have to use to keep him. To keep nature contained.
It's not even that impressive, because just flashing lights piss him off, because he thinks Anne's being attacked because, ooh, spooky lights.
Well, yes, okay, like, granted, it doesn't work, but I see where the symbolism of, like, the big iron pieces, like, as opposed to just some chains, which probably would have gotten lost in the animation and, like, the claymation style.
It would have been a pain in the ass to animate, too.
It would have been a huge pain in the ass.
Let's be honest, that's the reason they did what they did.
Oh, 100%, but the symbolism worked out so well.
Yeah, it did quite good. But also, so from here we get pandemonium and chaos, which...
As one would.
I didn't think about this the first time I watched King Kong. There was a part in it where, up until now, we've seen Kong as not really this dangerous creature outside of, like, to other dinosaurs. He's just kind of this almost gentle giant I mean, he did just kill a bunch of people.
He killed a lot of people, but not Anne. And let's be real, let's be very honest with ourselves here, everyone. You are supposed to relate to Anne.
Yes. But this is where we see the danger of him within society is he snatched a woman out of her bed, and because she wasn't Anne, just dropped her.
Yeah. And it's like, what, a 10-story building that he drops her from, too? It's pretty high.
4 or 5, I think.
I mean, for the time period, pretty high.
Yeah.
She's dead.
Yeah, and I'll get into tallest building in just a minute here, too.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that as architects, we both had that same thought.
No, exactly. But I think it's a good way to show how in danger Anne really is.
Yes, like it's not one of those like, oh, princess, he'd never hurt me sort of scenarios. No, he very easily could hurt you.
Which makes me wonder how many of the previous brides of Kong has he killed? Or, well, maybe, how many he's killed.
I think all of them. I think they're all dead.
Oh, well, no, they're obviously dead. It's not like Kong brought Anne up and he's got this whole harem of women up.
No, they are dead. Oh, okay, so because Cooper is such a gorilla nerd, and the study of gorillas goes back a very long time. Like, people have been fascinated in studying gorillas for a very long time. So I do think that he would have been well aware of the unpredictableness that a standard person, even someone researching, would have with gorillas. They're hard to understand, they are hard to read, and they are very strong and very deadly. I don't think that it is ever his intention to have, like, oh, Kong might not hurt her. I think he meant from the beginning that, like, no, even if he was a normal-sized gorilla, Anne would have been in terrible danger.
Yeah.
Anne knows nothing about gorillas and stares directly into the gorilla's eyes multiple times.
Well, you gotta remember, Kong isn't a gorilla.
No, he is not. He is technically given his own classification and naming system later on. It's essentially just Giant King Kong is the Latin version of it. It's just essentially
Gigantus Kongus.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's essentially what it is.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, it is a really solid arm-reaching in scene.
Like, no, it looks really cool.
When he does find Anne.
No, it does look cool.
But there's also what they call the famous train scene, which was added only because the rough cut was 13 reels, and Cooper added it to make it 14-year-olds because he's not going to do 13 because of superstitions.
Understandable, very reasonable.
And then Kong got cut down to 11 reels.
Well, you know, it was the thought that counts.
But we still wouldn't, if we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have had this.
It's really cool.
Really cool shot, yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
No. And then we get the setting up of that, hey, he's going to go to the Empire State Building as his destination. That's the way he's going. You hear it over the radios, which, reminder, Kong was king of his island, so he's climbed to...
the tallest thing on the island.
Tallest thing on the island, and tallest built structure in the world until the Willis Tower was built in the 70s.
Which was honestly very impressive. It then regained its honor because they stuck an antenna on the top. Cheating. I don't think it counts. It regained it for a very small amount of time.
That's the Chrysler Building.
It is the Chrysler Building, which honestly, same story.
Honestly, but then they decide, we're going to bring in the planes, which really is a cool, there's cool sets of shots where there's models, there's real planes, sometimes there's a combination of both.
Yep.
Cameo from the directors in the planes, which is actually,
it's really cool.
But they did not fly the real ones, by the way.
No.
That's a myth that they heavily debunked. And Cooper's the pilot and Shodek is the gunner.
Yeah, and honestly, for two guys who were so into planes, it is fitting that this is the way it goes.
Well, also, it feels like the natural solution for dealing with a creature on the tallest building is like, how do we get it down? Well, we gotta shoot it. We got nothing else.
And on top of that, you have to remember that, like, A, this was the Great Depression, but also, this was right after World War II, so, like, planes...
No, this is pre-World War II.
No, you're right. This is
we didn't have an Air Force yet.
We did not, but we did have cool planes, and it was like a common, like, popular, like, topic. Sorry, I get my wars mixed up because honestly, they might as well just been one long war. We had a little break in between, which was full of shit.
Yeah, now we're in the Forever War, and I'm not going to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole. So.
No, because we don't have a Kong to save us anymore.
No,
but no, the use of the planes is like the obvious solution. It's the equivalent of us dropping, like, it's the equivalent of a modern day, like, solution to Godzilla being dropping nukes on him. It's our big weapon. Theirs was the plane. That was, like, the cool new technology.
You mean you can't just send them off to space and let it be space's problem, like in Gamera?
Honestly, that is also a solution that is, like, the equivalent modern. Because, yeah, like, when, like, that was a solution, like, when space became, like, the new frontier, when we were heading to the moon, when we were putting stuff, and it was, like, in this, like, conscious mind of people. That was a solution to monsters at the time, was like, what if we stick them on a rocket? Yeah. What if we send them into space? That solves the problem.
Send them out on a raft.
Yes, and then
because we know apes don't like water.
Some. Most don't like water. I don't know if it would kill Kong, to be honest with you.
Oh, I'm not saying it would not kill him. It just, maybe you put him on a very large raft and
you push him gently release him.
Yeah, because
put him back on the island. That's literally what he was. He was on an island, and they took him off the island and put him on a bigger island.
I think the way they had to get, how the hell did they get Kong over here in the first place? Because we're in New York City. If he was found over in East Asia,
a boat.
Yes,
a big boat.
But
it's a long. I mean, that would have been a very long trip.
Yeah, we do have the Panama Canal, which is. It's weird thinking that is how old the Panama Canal is.
Oh yeah, but also, like, don't get me wrong, Kong being on a boat from all the way over there to all the way over here is not a realistic thing. However, like, taking animals from one end of the world and putting them on the other end of the world is not a new thing.
No,
like, we've been doing that for a very long time. I know
it's not. It's just how big Kong is, and like, what did they feed him along the way?
Well,
that we're talking like it's a couple months journey to get there.
Yeah, we'd have to find a lot of ladies for him to eat.
Also hiding. Well, we don't know if he eats the ladies.
That's true. We don't know for sure.
But also, like, hiding him from the public.
Yeah, that part is a little fantastical. However, we do have to remember that Kong's height ranges. So maybe when he's on the boat, he's only 18 feet tall.
Yeah, true.
Which is the shortest Kong is in this movie.
Yeah. But honestly, there are some cool shots here. This silhouette climb is really cool.
It's classic. It's so good.
The mixing of the stage model and close-ups is really well done. This is the part where, like, you could really see some of the deterioration from the lights.
And I mean, they worked fast on this movie, but, like, they had a very limited budget. A lot of this was still very new. Like, I'm surprised Kong looks as good as he does at the end of this movie.
Oh yeah,
because they beat the hell out of this model.
Yeah, even his death and falling is really good.
It looks great.
Really,
it's a classic too. Like it's something that like has been recreated countless times.
Yeah, and we get the Kong's dead and the really cheesy ending. Beauty killed the Beast.
To remind you once again that Cooper wanted this to be a Beauty and the Beast like parallel.
You don't say.
Again, there's a lot of hand holding in this in this time period.
Yeah.
This movie, I don't think does it more than others. I will state that. Like, granted, I have not watched every single movie from the 20s and the 30s, but I have seen an awful lot. And I would argue this is less hand-holdy than, like, a lot of them.
Yeah. No, I agree. It allows you to forget that it's trying to hold your hand for a while.
And honestly, I think it does it in a good way, because a lot of people, even when this movie came out, either didn't bother to read the cards or actively chose to focus on other parts of it, because there's many articles and reviews of critics talking about it in the papers about how they felt that it was about this thing or a symbolism of that thing or how amazing this was. And honestly, good. That's the way a movie should be.
Yeah, and honestly, the one thing that I'm more impressed about with King Kong than anything is I didn't realize how much of an impact it was to cinema. Like, I knew it was a cultural icon, but I didn't realize, hey, it pretty much invented sound effects, musical scores that matched the movie, the first special effects movie star.
And also, the first commentary.
Really?
Yes, this movie was released to home video, believe it or not, and it was released under...
Was it a Criterion release? Because I know Criterion invented the movie commentary.
No, it didn't.
Huh.
No, they didn't. Do they have one? They sure do. It was first released on Laserdisc in 1984 and had the first ever audio commentary on it.
Interesting.
Now, is it the audio commentary that Criterion is known for? No. It is very different, but it is the first commentary ever released to home video.
Well, let me think.
Did Criterion later buy this, and that might be where they're claiming that content? Yes. Because Who Owns Kong is kind of a messy water.
Yeah, because RKO's been out of business for a very long time.
Actually, do you want to get into it? Because I went down a fucking rabbit hole.
Yes, please. Please teach us history.
Okay, so we have said that Kong is Cooper's from the beginning, because I fully believe that. He made Kong up, he did the whole movie, he even did the sequel, which came out in the same year, which is crazy to think about.
No, Son of Kong came out 2 years later.
They started immediately.
Well, they started, but it didn't come out till a couple of years.
Anyway, Cooper also thought he owned Kong. He thought that he was only licensing the character Kong for the movies. Turns out that in 1935, when he went to go create a movie called Tarzan vs. Kong, he didn't actually license or lease Kong. He had maybe sold Kong. He didn't think that. However, it took him all the way until 1962 to take RKO to court because he had to collect all the paperwork proving that he had leased Kong and not sold Kong, and that RKO had been stealing from him this whole time. Something that ended up being a huge deal because it turns out that they had been selling toys of Kong, and all of that money, none of it went to Cooper.
Oh, jeez.
In fact, all of the sequels minus Son of Kong, none of that money went to Cooper either.
Well, that's shit.
Yeah, there were a few movies that he was trying to be part of. Again, Tarzan was one of them. However, when he went to go sue them, it was discovered that... You remember how we talked about him being a World War II hero?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, while he was in World War II, you remember how he got rid of a lot of stuff so that way no one would say that he was, like, being
a profiteer, yeah.
Yeah, it turns out he lost those documents when he did that.
Great.
So he lost the lawsuit, meaning that he did not own Kong at all. RKO owned Kong. He went back on it on 1975 because Universal bought Kong from RKO, hoping to make new movies from it. However, RKO also claimed that they didn't sell Kong. They were only licensing Kong. Same problem again. Well, here's the problem. Universal has better lawyers, and they found that no one had renewed Kong's license, so he was now in the public domain. Not the movies, just the book and the character Kong. And so Universal was claiming that they were doing that portion of Kong, not the movie. It wasn't until 1976 that Judge Reel, that's his actual name.
Yeah, it's kind of like, God, what's his name? Judge Reinhold.
Yeah, it's a fantastic name for a judge.
No, he's an actor. He's the uncle, or he's the stepfather in Home Alone.
Yes.
No, not Home Alone. Santa Claus.
Exactly. Yeah, no, just a good name. No, Judge Reel, his title is Judge, his last name is Reel.
Yeah.
I don't know what the man's real name is. But Judge Reel came back on a ruling for this and claimed that the name and story of Kong have always belonged to Cooper, who unfortunately was dead by this point.
Oh, damn.
So the Cooper estates actually owned the book and the name and character of King Kong. That did not include the movies. RKO owned the original movies, not the Cooper estate. Universal was then going to own their portion of the later movies that they had bought and were making.
Okay.
Which theoretically would have cleared all of this up. But it didn't, because Richard Cooper, one of the descendants of Mr. Cooper himself, who is the head of the estates, is, honestly, as far as any of this is going to worry about when I say Cooper from now on, it's Richard. He is running it just like the original Cooper had. He wanted to write books based off of it. It was decided that he would own just the books and the periodical publication rights, but nothing else. Then, 1982 rolls around, and guess what happens in 1982?
Public domain again.
No! Universal sues Nintendo, because in 1981 they had Donkey Kong.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, they lost because it was decided that King Kong was not... Well, it was clearly not meant to be Universal, specifically Universal's King Kong.
It's like when you do Frankenstein, you can't use the iconic Universal look for Frankenstein because Frankenstein was defined by Universal on that one.
Yes, but there was also some sneaky business that led to this ruling. I always thought it was base and cut because of all of the lawsuits that had come before it. Not quite true. The judge that had been ruling on this noted several big reasons on why that he made this claim. He claimed that a huge part of the reason that he did this was because they had lost the trademark to King Kong even before they had acted on this, that they had tried to then make Nintendo pay royalties without the court's permission. They had just tried to bully them into paying.
Oh.
And that they had then abused the jurisdictional system to try and then bully Nintendo into paying the dues.
Gotta remember, Nintendo's a very small game company at this point.
Yes. And so...
Well, video game company. They'd been making toys for a long time.
Exactly. So, thus, it was ruled in Nintendo's favor. So now we have another branch of Kong, because Donkey Kong is technically a Kong, but he is a different Kong, and he is Nintendo's Kong. So despite all of this, though, Universal still manages to own the majority rights to Kong to this day. Several new stories about Kong still come out under the Cooper name print, though. Those are not Universal's, those still originally owned to the Cooper estates. Warner Brothers owns RKO. They bought them ages and ages ago. So the RKO ones, those first two movies, Warner Brother now owns. And anything based off of those movies are licensed with Warner Brother with Universal's permission. It's a weird hand-holdy thing. I don't quite get it. But they haven't sued each other yet. I'm waiting.
Where's Pepe Sylvia following this?
Not sure. There's one more part, though.
Oh, God.
Okay, so there's one more part to Kong and who owns Kong, because honestly, there's now, 6 Kongs?
I lost track after, the first 2.
I understand. It took me a long time to dig through all these freaking lawsuits. There's a company called DDL, and since the 1976 remake of King Kong, they own the rights to specifically the 1976 remake, and while they do not have any other rights, they need Universal's permission to make any other Kong thing.
Okay.
So, that is why Kong, despite being the icon that he is, that is why he now looks the way he does. Even though, technically there should be room for, all of the mass improvements that we saw in, the 50s through the 70s with Kong, and just how much random crap Kong was in for a while. People sued each other and were mean, and that's why we can't have nice things now.
Oh, fun. Great.
Yep, that's the long and complicated story of who owns Kong, and unfortunately, it's really not the Cooper estate, despite the amount of work that they did on this movie.
It's a shame, or like O'Brien got some of the rights.
O'Brien got none of the rights.
Yeah,
in fact, a lot of people didn't realize he worked on this movie.
Yeah, no, O'Brien got screwed over heavily because everyone was successful after Kong.
Yep.
But O'Brien only worked on 3 movies after, including Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, and The Black Scorpion.
There's like a rumor, and I don't like that it's a rumor, but it's kind of the only thing that makes sense, is that O'Brien somehow got blacklisted because the only people who would hire him were Cooper.
Yeah.
So I don't know that for certain. It is a rumor that has floated around the internet since like the Kong history nerds have like been around. I would like to think that maybe he just wasn't as interested in making movies anymore.
No.
But probably not, because he tried really hard to keep going.
Yeah, no, they mentioned he really wanted to, but no one just wanted to work with him. And again, it could be depression that, hey, there wasn't enough budget for that type of movie since Son of Kong didn't do as well.
It didn't, but we were also getting close to the end of the Depression, and a lot of O'Brien's work after the Depression didn't get any better.
Well, the unfortunate thing is, after the Depression, which was the World War II that got us out of it, World War II, also a lot of the efforts went into like pro-war films and weren't heavily geared for stuff like this.
That's very true. There wasn't a lot of room for a fun King Kong stop animation.
Yeah. But speaking of nerds, because
there's a lot.
The Criterion nerds will come out of us.
They will. Let them.
I looked it up real quick. Criterion is the people who pioneered the commentary with the Laserdisc version of King Kong.
There you go. That's who technically owns that version of Kong. Another owner of Kong.
And now makes me want to get Laserdisc to hunt down Criterion.
You are not the only one. I also was interested. You have to have some money. And big luck to find this version.
Yeah, no, I know. I've looked at Laserdisc Criterion here and there, and some of it's a bit pricey. The ones that aren't pricey are like Rashomon and any Akira Kurosawa film that's still in the collection. Yeah,
unfortunately, this version of Kong was even like, quote-unquote Criterion styling, so, like, I looked because I was like, I wonder how much that goes for nowadays. A lot, that's how much.
And quick little thing about Criterion is, they pioneer this stuff, but they're also kind of the successor of this one channel that used to be called Channel Z.
Yes. That
brought over a lot of foreign films before it was as vested in our culture as it is now.
Exactly, yeah.
But back to Kong. Honestly, it is interesting because they did, like I said, they rushed the piggybacked off the success to make the sequel, and that came out in 1933. And Ray Harryhausen was inspired and worked on the 1949 Mighty Joe Young under O'Brien, who had delegated the animation due to working with a lot of the other technical problems outside of it.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And to give connections of why also King Kong is important for us too. Harryhausen would later go to do these theatrical or technical effects on the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was the inspiration for Godzilla that we've brought up many times in this.
Yes. Oh, yes. And then, of course, King Kong fights Godzilla several times. So, there's that.
Well, I don't know in the new one, but at least twice as far as I know.
That's several.
No, several's like 3. I just got their last podcast on the left, them bitching and arguing about this argument of what's several.
Sure.
It's a couple times. After that, it's out the window. There's no actual definition.
Sure.
But yeah, I honestly like going back and watching Kong, especially having spent years now studying other films and practical effects.
Yeah.
It is fascinating that how well it actually does still hold up, in my opinion.
No, I honestly agree too. Granted, I know I usually have like a blind spot because I love these old movies and I love like kind of honestly campy and cheesy looking films. I would argue though that the majority of this film, especially knowing that all of it was done with practical effects, still looks damn good.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. And I think what also holds it up, because I've watched movies that I watched Equinox, which I can't remember his name. The guy who did the special effects for it would go on to do Star Wars.
Yeah.
Equinox is not a good movie, but
no, it's not.
Sometimes the pioneers aren't great. And that's the thing with Kong, is the pioneer is great.
Yeah, and it truly is.
Like, I know I've pissed off friends with not thinking The Lion King was as good as they thought it was, or not Casablanca.
Let's see. Have you watched Casablanca?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
My husband hasn't.
I know he hasn't. Citizen Kane.
Sure.
I ranked it like 7 out of 10, and he's like, really? One of my friends is like, really? A 7? And I'm like, yeah, I get why it was good for the time, but it's not a good movie. And that's where King Kong is a good movie, though.
You're like Peter Griffin in that one scene from Family Guy where he's like, since we're all going to die, I have a confession. I did not care for The Godfather.
Okay.
Really, Peter? The movie's great. No, I know. Didn't care for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fine. That's fine. I don't shit on people for like their opinions of not liking movies that I love. I know I watch a lot of garbage. I mean, hell, you came over and I was watching Tokyo Tribe and someone was getting flung into a fan.
Yeah, which apparently is a rap movie and is wild looking.
Rap musical.
Fantastic. I love it. But yeah, no, I try very hard to do the same. However, I do think Kong is one of those points in movies where even if you normally aren't into old movies or into special effects style movies, this is a movie that you cannot deny the importance of it culturally. Mm-hmm. There is not a damn thing that you haven't seen that somehow has Kong been influenced by it. Yeah,
it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz of monster movies.
It really is. Like, honestly, there was big monster movies before this, but in the way that it influenced literally the world, Kong is the OG.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about Japanese movies. Japan made a King Kong movie, they made 2 King Kong movies. Unfortunately, they're both lost. I've looked them up. They are not good looking.
No, they don't look great.
But it's one of those things that I wish that we still had around, because I'd love to see that take on, we took Godzilla and we're going to make it our own kind of thing.
Oh, for sure. I mean, hell, we've talked about Godzilla several times, but to like truly nail home the point, a huge inspiration for Godzilla was King Kong. He saw it and was like, wow, look at the giant scale of this movie. How cool.
Yeah, and then they eventually got the 2 of them to fight each other. How awesome is that?
Honestly, Clash of the Titans, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And granted, I understand that the new version of Kong does not have the same weight and impact that, honestly, a lot of the other Kongs do. Granted, Kong suffers from the same problem that Godzilla does. The first one, culturally significant, very impactful, and still holds up. And then it kind of puddles through a bunch of, like, goofy iterations. Like, King Kong fights Superman in one comic book at some point.
Jesus Christ.
Like, there is not a franchise that King Kong hasn't touched, though.
Cal just sent me, Godzilla got venomized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, no, like, and like, I would argue that Godzilla has had a better comeback in recent years, and I think a lot of that has to do with, like, the base inspiration for Godzilla has to do a lot with technology we are still grappling with, whereas with King Kong, we have managed to just kind of destroy his base concept.
And I think part of it, too, is how, I mean, we tried keeping that thing with Godzilla, too, but I think it's just the level of production and quality that got booted out, because,
True.
like we've said, Skull Island, or Son of Kong, not good at all.
No, it's bad. However, I will give them credit for so quickly turning around on something. And also, yes, it's bad. Is it the worst Kong movie I've ever watched? No, not even close.
No. Oh, man. Okay, I'll go on my little rant about Son of Kong. I got so pissy at the end of that movie. Well, I'm like, okay, Son of Kong, and it's like, oh, wait. Who is Kong fucking? Like, who is he screwing? And, like, how, like, that just brought up a whole, like, how many gorillas really are there? Is Son of Kong really the last Kong? I mean, Godzilla has a kid, and we don't know how that happens, but...
Well, we don't worry about that one, though.
No, God, well, it depends which one you're talking about.
True.
But, like, watching it, it just, like...
There's a lot of questions.
The way it ends with the Son of Kong sacrificing himself for fucking Driscoll, it's like... Okay, now both your families have died, or your entire species has died because the entire island sinks. Oh yeah, natives gone too there.
Yeah.
To save one shitty fucking director who can't, as far as we know...
Never made a movie.
Well, he's made controversial movies, but...
Yeah.
This one movie. He couldn't make one movie about a giant gorilla.
Which was honestly not that hard to track down. No, I fully agree with you. I think King Kong, Son of Kong is a terrible movie. Is it the worst Kong movie I've ever watched? Absolutely not. Have I seen them all? No. Are a lot of them garbage? Oh my god, yes. However, I will give a little bit of credit. Son of Kong is one of the very few instances I think we have of active listening from a director and producer set. Because when King Kong came out, one of the major gripes of King Kong was that audiences, because they felt such a connection to Kong in a way that I don't think anyone had anticipated, like, yes, he has a lot of roles, and they did put a lot of effort into his features and face. I don't think they thought people were going to literally fall in love with Kong.
No.
They, like, the audience saw him as another actor, not a monster, not a creature, not a prop, which was kind of unheard of.
Yeah, and, well, even then, like, how they sold the idea to Fay Ray that, oh, you're going to be with the tallest, darkest...
handsomest man, yeah.
Or, not even handsomest, they just said tallest and darkest co-star you'll ever work with.
They weren't lying.
No.
But the number one complaint from most critics and from a lot of audience, because they had this connection with Kong that I don't think anyone foresaw, was that they were very devastated that Kong died in the end, and there was no justice for Kong. And granted, that's kind of the point of the movie.
Yeah.
But it was meant to be in a more metaphorical way as opposed to, like, this actual, like, connection to Kong.
Yeah, same as there's no justice for the natives in Cannibal Holocaust.
Correct. But also, like, I think Son of Kong, despite being honestly garbage, is one of the few instances we see of a director hearing people's complaint about his movie, and instead of either not making a second or just addressing it in public, being like, oh, I see what you mean, but, you know, meh.
Disney and the Acolyte.
Yeah, Disney on a lot of things. This was one of the few instances where, while making the second movie, when those critiques came in, he actively made the choice to make the director and Son of Kong's relationship meant to be a one to redeem Kong's memory. And granted, that's why I think it sucks.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that was something that, like, he actively listened to the critics and his fans and was like, I'll give it a try. I don't think I mean, if that's what you want.
Yeah, from what I've heard, Mighty Joe Young seems to be, like, a better spiritual sequel to King Kong.
It definitely is. Granted, part of that is because there is no King Kong in Mighty Joe Young. It's just Mighty Joe Young.
It's just a gorilla.
It's just a gorilla. But, yes, I think, honestly, Kong's influence in general goes so far beyond just other gorilla themes in movies and shows. Like, the way it was shot, the effort put into the special effects and the props was something that really inspired a lot of other people. And it was something that inspired people who weren't in the movie industry. Like I said, this came out during the height of the Great Depression, and opening day, it did pretty good.
Oh yeah, we forgot to mention it was released in 2 theaters simultaneously, which was never done before.
Never done before. It actually made money its first day, and a lot of people think it would have made money its second day. However, to help curb the Great Depression, the second day it came out was announced to be a bank holiday, and so a lot of places were closed, and so people didn't go to the theater.
Fun. Which
honestly was the main reason that it didn't make money that day, and, like, there's a huge dip in its, like, profit graph, which sucks because, honestly, King Kong is one of the few franchises that has steadily made money over the years.
I mean, I can see it. I mean, hell, they're still releasing King Kong. We're talking about King Kong almost 100 years late after its making.
Yes. Which is wild to think about, because not only are we talking about it from, like, a historical context, which we are, we actively are getting new Kong, like, things. And not just like what if we remade this film no one's heard of before? No, like, people actively follow Kong.
No, exactly. I mean, the same thing's going to happen with Godzilla. I hope to be alive for its 100th year anniversary, too.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. That'd be so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Kong influenced the world in a way that I don't think anything else had. And not just in, like, the way that we normally think of, the way that an effort that went into practical effects from this point on moved from just being practical effects for, like, the mystique and mystery and almost, like, magic act into a much more focused in on the theatrics and excitement that one could make on screen.
Yeah. No, I agree. So, Chris, at the end of it all, good, bad, weird, what do you rate Kong?
For me, this is just good. I know there's a lot of weird elements, but once you've watched a bunch of other Kongs, you realize that this is the tamest.
Okay. Yeah, I've only seen this one and the Jackson one. I think I'm on that same page. I'm going to give it a good. I do think I see why it's such a great film, and especially learning more about, like, why or what it did to change cinema. I think that just makes it even more impactful.
Oh, definitely.
And also, like, even though there are the bad aspects that we've talked about and some of the interpretation of it that is negative.
Yes.
Honestly, it doesn't overshadow the movie that much.
No, it is something that I appreciate, that there are those who can do full research papers for me to like dive in and read about their interpretations or their like exploration of that time period with Kong as their lens. But it is not so forceful that it is distasteful to watch the movie. Like, we've done other movies where we've had to openly be like, yeah, this part, you could skip this. This part is actively bad.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of actively terrible parts of Kong. Are there probably parts that would be done better now? Sure, of course there is. It was the 1930s. But it's still watchable, which is honestly amazing.
No, but yeah, that's fascinating that it's able to stand that. So, Chris, do you recommend King Kong?
This is one of the and like, I don't like telling people they have to watch something because it is culturally or academically significant. However, I would argue that King Kong is the exception to that rule. Even if you are not into old movies, even if you're not into creature features or quote-unquote horror, King Kong is something that if you have not seen the original version, you are missing a huge portion of cultural and significant lens to the rest of your life, even if you are not a movie person.
Yeah, it's like me watching Columbo and now seeing Columbo references all over the place.
Yes. This is the equivalent of, like, when people say they have never seen any Lord of the Rings, and you wonder how they get through their day. Because at this point, Lord of the Rings has become such an impactful portion of our history, our current history, that it's hard not to see influences other places. King Kong is that, but for literally everything else you've ever done.
My buddy Micah is one of those guys. He has seen one Lord of the Rings.
I'm proud of him.
He was over at my parents' house for Christmas, and we went to the theaters and saw, I think, the third Hobbit movie.
Okay, not the strongest start.
No. But he had never seen a single Lord of the Rings before that.
And, like, I get it, because I have friends, I have family who are not movie people, and I understand the lens of thinking, like, I am not a movie person, I don't see how this actively impacts me. However, King Kong is one of those rare exceptions that even if you are not a movie person, even if you do not think yourself, like, in, quote-unquote, this world, King Kong has impacted things all the way down to books, candies, movies, posters, the way we film and think about things, the way we talk about nature and history, and the way we treat certain aspects of our world, that I don't think without having at least seen the original one, you are missing a huge chunk of how the rest of the world has portrayed itself.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely do recommend it. I don't think King Kong is too old-timey to not watch.
Sure.
I don't know. It's hard to... I understand it's very hard to recommend to people who don't like old-timey stuff, but I think I have to agree with you that King Kong is one of the base points of our pop culture that you gotta give a go.
I would say, of history in general, King Kong was one of those films that literally bridged nations, and we've all agreed and shaken hands that King Kong is super dope and cool.
Yeah, I mean, it crossed to Japan, and they had crossovers there, too, so... and
pre-World War II.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, like, an amazing accomplishment of human ingenuity.
And, I mean, hell, there's The Great Buddha Arrives, another lost film from the 30s that Japan made, that had our first kaiju-sized creature. Granted, we gotta remember, the skyscrapers were, like, 5-6 stories at that time.
I would say, hitting 10 was literally world-breaking news.
Yeah, that's why the Empire State Building is so impressive and why Kong climbing it is such a great climax for it.
It is truly amazing. It's a bit like trying not to recognize any other, like going to Chicago and not noticing any of the architecture. Like how would you not at least recognize the world around you? Kong is, unfortunately, even if you do not like old films, so impactful that I think at least once you need to watch it.
No, exactly. But now it's a new season and a new game. Chris and I are playing bingo, and you can too.
Woohoo!
Rules for the players are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. Cards can be found on our socials at TGTBTW_podcast on Instagram and Threads, and TGTBTW podcast on Twitter. You are free to email us the requests as well at TGTBTWpodcast@gmail.com. You can use any of the 3 bingo varieties. But each stamp must be associated with an episode from season 6. First place gets to choose a movie they would like us to do a deep dive on and 2 micro reviews for season 7. Second place gets to choose a deep dive and 1 micro review. Third place gets to choose 2 micro reviews. Fourth and fifth place get to choose a micro review. So feel free to share and add us on social media for participation. Rules are a little different for Chris and myself. We get a total of 2 stamps per deep dive. First to get a bingo in any of our good, bad, or weird card gets to choose a movie they feel fits that category for season 7.
Perfect.
What do you got, Chris?
My first one is going to be, honestly, the most obvious one. On my good card, I will be going for good special effects for the times, because how can one deny the special effects of this movie?
Okay.
My second choice is a very difficult choice. I've had to think long and hard, because honestly, this movie is pretty much all good, and my other option is on the good card, which I can't use. So I'm going to have to go with my bad card, and saying that the main character is kind of wrong, because I do think that our main man wanting to capture Kong is a little bit wrong. But I understand that he would have made a lot of money.
No, I agree. I think that's a good choice for that. And while I am tempted to do tits,
I was also tempted by tits. There's just not a lot of tits. And depending on what version of the movie, there's no tits.
Yeah, and as much as I'd like to do a Columbo reference,
I also thought of the Columbo reference, but I didn't feel like it was strong enough.
No, it's just me off one referencing. I'm going to go with my first one on the bad card. An animal dies.
An animal does die. Kong himself, dead. And also a lot of dinosaurs.
Yeah, a lot of animals die in this one.
A lot of death in general.
And I'm going to go with good special effects for the time for my good card.
Honestly, how can you not?
Because you gotta. I mean,
it's the original good special effects for the time.
No, exactly. I mean, it started it all, so.
It sure did, man.
But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace! Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.